So let's resume our workshop and our session on studying science, philosophy of science, and scientometrics in dialogue. And please welcome Andrea Scharnhorst. I hope I pronounced it correctly. She's a senior policy advisor at the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, and she has published extensively on different topics in scientometrics. I remember a very nice collection of essays on models of science dynamics, I remember well, but she has also worked on the matter of facts and application of linked data in the humanities. And her latest book, co-edited with Miralia, is Linking Knowledge, which I think is a very good title also in terms of our workshop. So without much further ado, I leave her the floor, please.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction, and it's always nice to hear that somebody realizes that books are around and actually even look into this. So I would like to thank the organizers for this superb conference. I think I'm enjoying it tremendously, yeah. And because you made it so wonderful and had so wonderful speakers lined up, I'm not quite sure I will bring groundbreaking new thoughts to this discourse, yeah. But maybe I can bring my own perspective to it. And what I also do, what I usually don't like to do, I like to walk around while talking, is that I will make myself reading now. And that's basically to not get lost in my own storytelling too much. So that's the one disclaimer. And the second disclaimer is that I'm talking about three cases, three kind of lines of research, and all the references for further reading are also in slides. Yeah. So slide 2. As promised in the abstract, I kick my presentation off with a reference to a program Lud Leidesdorf and myself wrote at the beginning of the 2000s. And I will not have time to really now dissect this program, but I will make a reference to the program at the closure of the talk and maybe also explain why I have chosen to start with this. So looking at the picture on the title page today, which shows the triple helix dimensions and the layers of knowledge production in society, or the subsystems one could say, and all the indicators we a bit kind of lay-wise imagined there. One can say one thing for sure, namely that we have much more data. The question is, do we also have much more knowledge? And that will be the red line, or you could also say that will be the running joke through my presentation. I also promised in the abstract that I talk about measuring around newly emerging structures in an intermediate function. And what I mean by that are things like in the research infrastructure realm. So think about libraries, archives, yeah, or new European kind of kits on the block, another type than the types we already heard in previous talks. And I will talk a bit about some lessons which I learned when exploring measurement in and about them. And that has to be anecdotally for the sake of time, but as said, references are also given in the slides. With the success, let's start with an introduction. With the success of the quantitative studies of science, one could say that the study of the sciences has moved from the reflective philosophical corner to a rather natural science corner. At least this is the way I would tell the story, and that's far less sophisticated than Charles' story, which was much more deep. And I would even say it has moved from being a gentleman's amusement with science, history, and philosophy to become an instrument for managerial need. And I often start lectures on aspects of scientometrics and indicator research with the following narrative. And I think you all know this narrative. The science system grew. After the Second World War, it almost exploded. There's public money going into it, and monitoring is needed. Stop. And I'm bringing up one of the pictures of the beautiful Atlas of Science of Katie Börner, but you have seen lots of them, so you're all familiar with the exponential and hyper exponential growth. phenomena. So interestingly, and this is also something Cassidy kind of unfolded in much more depth and richness, there were the same trends in West as well as in the East. And if one reads, as an example, the essays of an information scientist, edited by Eugene Garfield, which is actually bringing together all the essays he wrote on top of the current content, which were issued regularly. And they are online, and you can search them. I think they are hosted at the Drexel University. They are all digitized PDFs, and they are full text search already since centuries. And I always recommend, if somebody interested in quantitative studies has a topic, just go there and search for that. There's 99% security that he will have touched upon that in one of his essays. Yeah. But what I wanted to mention here is that if I'm reading these old kind of documents, I can still feel the excitement about all those new possibilities to measure. But also, and I feel very touched by that, it is expressed in a very modest, almost carefully testing the grounds kind of attitude about what machines, what automatization might be able to do for us in finding information primarily at that time, in understanding academia in this famous triangle of Garfield, Price, Merton, Liederberg, Zuckerman, and so on. And I think the makers of these new information systems were themselves taken a bit by surprise by this adamant use of those systems for evaluation. And if you look to the early printed versions of the NSF indicators, they breathe the same kind of modesty. Yeah. So the question is, or an observation is, did we lose this kind of innocence or modesty at the start of automatization in the 50s and 60s? And because we are now kind of watching a new wave of automatization with generative AI, I think it's very interesting to go back to those debates in the 50s and the 60s and try to learn from them. So yes, we can measure, but why? And the other question is also, in the digital age, it is quite clear that we are all ruled by numbers. I mean, everything is in binaries, right? But seduced by the fact that we can count, and also under the verdict that we should count for all kinds of reasons, mostly also accountability of spending tax money, we often seem to have forgotten the limitation of counting, for which we actually need to consult philosophy. And I think this is why we have the workshop. So when we seek truth in numbers, I think I learned this is a positivistic approach with everything which comes with it. And sometimes I think we are seduced a bit too much into positivism. Let me illustrate that with lessons learned, which I did myself in 3 cases. And I start as the first case with my own institution. And I don't know how much this can actually be seen. Maybe not much, but I think you kind of get an impression of the figures. So what's the story behind that poster? Yeah, I entered DANS in 2012. And DANS, standing for Data Archiving and Network Services, is a relatively new institute of the Royal Academy. And it was founded in 2005 around one of the first web-based services to self-archive. So that is prior to the Dataverse network, which came about in 2006. Figshare came about in 2011. Zenodo we have since 2030, and so on and so on. And it was quite an innovation, in particular for the social sciences. And there was also a bit of an uneasy feeling that people could come with their data and drop them as they wish. I mean, they were still controlled and curated by the archivists. Yeah. But being in this institute and coming in this institute newly, that also gave me ideas, or I was intrigued and I wanted to actually study it. Yeah. And in one of the projects, there was an EC-funded project, Impact EV. I think the Budapest group was also involved in that, run by Barcelona, very interesting sociological group. We had resources and in-house capacities to actually look into information registered around our digital data services. And this was in the period of 2013, where we had also quite a lot of visitors. So Christine Borgman from the UCLA came and visited us. She had won a visiting professorship grant, and Herbert van de Zompel was around, and Andrew Traylor. And Christine came with all her background on ethnographically based information studies on data uses, so setting kind of the fundament, what is now called data practices and how to understand them. And she wanted to do a project with us. And at the same time, Andrew and Herbert were staying there, and they were all on fire about what we can now trace. With the article of the future, with the enhanced publications, we can actually trace everything. So every little thought, the moment it is brought into the computer, is now traceable. Now, Paul knows that I'm a rather conservative person, so I was kind of standing there watching those two gentlemen, and I was thinking, and what do we do with all this storage? Yeah, because I had also learned something on the Science Citation Index, and I knew about the problems of data curation. Yeah, so I was kind of scratching my head. But we wanted to do some studies, and at the end, and we did. But the question we wanted to follow is actually, can we trace what people do if they interact with our archive? And you would think this is trivial, yeah? They have to log in, it's all on the web, there are log files, we can trace their journeys. And I learned, I was also a bit naive, yeah? No, we can't. And why can we not? Because the logging of the information is actually triggered by keeping the machinery running. It is not set up and designed to keep the use of the machine, to record the use of the machine. But we had a lot of data, and I'm a statistical physics by first training, so we did something decent, yeah, I would say, even if I say it myself. So we did skew distribution of the size of our data set. We did a tree map on where the data were coming from, which kind of fields. We looked into APIs, and we were surprised that our little archive was consulted in Australia. Yeah, we hadn't thought about that. We looked into queries and search term. We did that, but at the end, the really interesting outcome was coming from the qualitative study with Christine Borgman, which was based on interviews of people who downloaded data sets, who uploaded data sets, and interviews with our archivists ourselves. So there I learned much more about the archive than from those kind of studies. And I kind of said it before. So yes, we often have a lot of numbers, but we often also just not have the numbers we really need. Yeah. And the kind of the mundane infrastructure analogy which came to my mind when I was writing that up is, think about trains. Yeah. So if you think about trains, then there are systems to know where the trains are at a certain moment and what they do and how they switch and where they run. This is the kind of information we usually have on digital web services, not the monitoring of the passengers stopping into the train and stopping out of the train and switching trains. So I think, and now I'm of course lost because I started to go away from my text here. So I think we really need to remind ourselves now and then, and I'm still kind of baffled if I see a new information system popping up or being set up with new technologies. I'm baffled of the endless optimism people have, how accurate they can then measure with it. Yeah, so it's like the technology is almost decoupled from the content, and the content will magically, purely kind of being, I don't know, born from in this system, which is of course not true, as we know. Looking at the practical aspect of this case at hand, the research question we had at that time, and do I think we need, and we can measure archive metrics? I think yes, yeah. So I think we can, and we should also do quantitative studies around data practices and research infrastructures. But we need to clarify the information recording structure primarily before we actually execute the studies. Yeah. So collection before measurement. And you can see what happens if quantitative studies are executed before there is a certain level of maturity in data collections, with those studies which are now so kind of obsessed with data citation. Yeah. And I understand that we need these kind of studies. We also need to see where the limitations of the system is. But if I have to review some of the papers, then I think, gosh, it has taken, when the Science Citation Index was started, the referencing culture was already around 100 of years, 200 of years, yeah? And then it was formalized and automized. The formalization of data citation, 10 years, 20 years, yeah? So it's, despite of the technology makes it faster, yeah? But the habit to reference to data sets from the scientific production, from the production process of scientific knowledge, this is not yet established across fields. So we had a PhD student, Kathleen Gregory, which does beautiful work now, also with Stephanie Haustein in Canada on data citation. Other groups a lot of people are looking into the qualitative side of data citations. And there's a lot to be understood there. So standardization is just about to be implemented, and we need to sort that out before we go on. So let's see, where am I in time? Yeah, let's talk about my second case, and maybe I can make it a bit quicker. No, I'm not sure. My second case is about a research infrastructure, and I warned you, this is kind of autobiographically informed. So I'm talking about DARIA because for all my sins, I'm one of the coordination team of DARIA. I have a fancy title. We are now getting rid of the titles, but I'm the Chief Integration Officer of DARIA. Don't ask me what it means. That was the time when they set it up and they needed to have a CEO, a CIO, a COO, whatsoever. Yeah? So I don't know how many of you have ever heard about ERICS. How many of you have heard about ERICS? Some. Most of you have not heard about ERICS. You are with the majority of the people out there. Yeah? So most of the people, even the people who work with in DARIA and with DARIA, are not aware that this is not a project, but a legal construct. Yeah? Which was introduced by the European Commission to align infrastructural efforts in the various European member states. And it is kind of similar to what we now also try to do with the European Open Science Cloud and the upcoming data and science clusters. And so scientists, science organization, even science management wise people, they all have a hard time to still have an overview about all these popping up intermediaries layers. But it is important to understand, whatever I'm now going to say, that the ERIC is a legal organization, it's not a project. So that means that member states subscribe to be part of it, and it operates in a certain domain. DARIA is sitting in the domain of arts and humanities, and there it is one of the early ones. And DARIA is part of a group of such European research infrastructures across various domains. And one of the network where they all meet and discuss is the ERIC Forum. And in this network, a debate started several years ago about so-called, you hear it coming, key performance indicators, right? And I remember, and I checked with my colleague if I remembered correctly, but I remember that Jennifer Edmond, one of the presidents of DARIA, came back from one of these meetings and said, we are sitting there with all the other ERICs representing various scientific domains, and when it comes to KPI, they can only talk about publication and impact factor. And I know that the humanities will not cut it. Yeah? So we need to do something. Yeah? if we are bound to justify our work in terms of impact factor, we can close the ERIC. Yeah. So she became, and she is a very driven kind of person, excellent scholar also. So she said we need to be kind of proactive here. So we need to do something which really kind of shows the advances we bring to the communities. And we had a lot of brainstorming and a lot of talk. So we would think about what is it actually what we do. And ERIC ideally would produce a common used infrastructure. But what you probably don't know, what I didn't know either, is that in Europe, we even don't have an infrastructure on trains which is shared. Yeah? So you can imagine how much shared infrastructure we have on research, right? So in essence, and that holds for Daria, I think the most, it's a platform to coordinate nationally deployed kind of services. It's a coordination network function. There are other ERICs which are built around a commonly shared resource, a database, yeah, or a certain workflow kind of connection, but not Daria. So in this case, in the Daria case, we really started from the meaningful side, not as in the DANS case where we started from the, oh, we have a lot of data, can we do something interesting with it? Yeah. And we kind of solved it. And people are creative, they are inventive, and we have now several systems in place. None of them is very elegant. We know that ourselves. We deal with Google Sheets, partly databases. We're very proud to get integrated or have an integration with the EOSC marketplace, and the SHOC has its own marketplace. We use KNAW, so we are not, we know about those platforms, but it is still okay. And what we came up, or one of the key elements, is that we actually look at events. So we look at events and we try to formalize or to quantify our outreach. So how much people do we connect to? I mean, if you just lay back and think about it, it's actually a crazy kind of thing to do, but we had to come up with something, yeah? And we can produce these very nice infographics, and they also show some changes, but I'm too long in metrics and I kind of don't believe in numbers anymore. I'm also a physicist and not an experimental one, so theoretical physicists have also an interesting relationship to numbers, I can tell. And I'm also intimate enough with the process of information gathering, being one of the persons who has produced the content for this system, yeah? So if you really wanted to talk about the impact of infrastructures, I think we for sure forget half of the stuff who is really relevant and where we really have an impact. And that is partly also because impact cannot really be measured. I'm also in a review paper for Social Science and Humanities who sorted that out in Impact EV, by the way. But also because even if we remember, we forget half of the things to record. And we forget that also sometimes because we are part of different networks. So we all run around and we have not only one head. So we have a kind of documentation duty towards different layers of networks. They all wanted to show their synergy and their impact. And that's, I think, one of the biggest sources of noise. Yeah. So I think what we did in Daria is kind of decent, but what is probably much more interesting for a debate on quantitative analysis of research structures is the categories with which we came up, not the actual numbers, maybe the order of magnitude, not the parts behind the commas. So the lesson from the first one was that, have I now already spoken 40 minutes? No?
25.
Okay. So the lesson from the first case was often we have a lot of numbers, but just not the numbers that we really need. And the lesson from the second one I wanted to bring to you is that the numbers can belong to different systems, which are actually interwoven. Yeah. And sometimes I said that categories and magnitude is actually much more interesting. Now let me come to the third case, which is actually would make a lecture on itself. But this is an experience in research data management in a project which just was closed. And it's a beautiful project. And if you are into musicology, just look it up. It has been run by the University of Bologna, by the computer science department, semantic web people, Valentina Presutti. Yeah, a very nice project. And those people, that is I have seen a lot of projects, but this is one of the projects where the makers of the proposals already thought about knowledge management or project management in their project from the beginning. So the general setup in this kind of project is that they had 10 pilots, and then they got a design firm and they color coded it. So we have a color coding running through the whole kind of project. It's visually really, really interesting. Yeah. And those pilots, they are grouped into preserving information on musical objects, managing them, studying them, or interacting with them. And one example, for instance, are bells in Italy. So information on bells in Italy is in the big catalogus, the institute which belongs to the Ministry of Culture, yeah, kind of holds, but the bells were not indexed. So you have in the catalog, you have information on bells, but not systematically indexed. So it could not be retrieved. The catalog was already in linked data. Now this kind of dimension is added to it. And now you can also search for bells. And now you can make interfaces in which you can put yourself on the map. And then you have a circle and you can actually show all the church bells you can hear from that point. That is one of the latest results. It's very nice. And what they also did very, very nicely is they connected to the communities of bell ringers, which have an interest to also have this information. So a very cultural heritage computer science edgy project. So how to do management of those assets? And there was another kind of Italian working for the Open Science University, Enrico Daga, who came up with the idea we need to have an ecosystem. Now, the ecosystem metaphor is also nothing new, but he had a very concrete idea how to make it happening. He said, and the idea actually goes back to the fact that this was a project where everybody was either coding or providing collections which would be made machine readable. So everything was in the realm of collective software development. So, and everything was taken place in GitHub. So they borrowed or they used the possibilities of GitHub to build an intermediate layer in which we have, and I can't show you the details, but I can show you the outcome, in which we have different, oh, that's also not readable. You have different categories. We have data, tools, and reports. Now that's the kind of most obvious categorization you can come from. And this kind of website can be navigated and is automatically produced. This is something Enrico did. I borrowed his slides. Is automatically produced out of GitHub. So in GitHub, each of the components of the ecosystem has to have a repository. Those repositories have a README file. Those README files are kind of read. They are annotated in a specific way. I think the annotation system can be seen here. And there were a lot of discussions through all the during all the projects on how to do this, which categories to use, which existing controlled vocabularies to reuse, and so on and so on. At the end, what is the nice thing out of that research ecosystem is that you can produce a research data management plan, something everybody who does research kind of suffers, but you show your data in context. So it's not longer that you fill tables or you answer questions. Actually, I was the data steward on that project, and the last version, I went to our website and I copy and pasted from the website to the various kind of questions. So you have everything in one. and you are on a level of granularity, which is a bit more granular than the usual work packages, task, kind of what we all know in projects, yeah, how you get the project going. But it is also much more aggregated than annotating each of the digital objects, each of the digital research objects, yeah. So that was my third case. So, and what I learned from this is good measurement requires good designed documentation. But yes, there is always a competition between the time for documentation and the actually time for research. So the benefit of quantifying, if you wanted to trace knowledge production, needs to outweigh the costs of the documentation. And if you do a documentation without a design, you can just forget about it. Yeah? So let me run you through the lessons again. So in the first case, I wanted to emphasize that we often have a lot of numbers. This is almost trivial, yeah? A lot of numbers, but almost always not the numbers we need. This is also to the idea of we use the numbers we already have. This is what I thought in the Duns case, to discover that we don't have the numbers I wanted to have. Sometimes the categories you wanted to measure are already more, so your attempt to measuring is already an intellectual kind of exercise worth doing, yeah? And it's also best done before you start to implement a system to collect content, yeah? And then you have always this kind of this fight between documentation and research, in particular because researchers themselves are supposed to do the documentation, and the whole scientific community seems to have forgotten that documentation is a skill. So I wasn't trained as an information scientist, yeah, and I stepwise in my career discovered that there is a whole field out there with different branches, which all do this, yeah. And now everybody can be a data steward, and that's then also the level of data stewardship we have. I think I skipped this, and I wanted to come back to Lut's program. And if you wanted to see how this program has materialized, then I recommend you to read his last book, which is, I'm so happy that he could finalize that, because there he really brought all the stuff he has published in very many articles, yeah, he synthesized them together. So I think, why did I start it with this program, despite of wanting to give honor to Lut? Because in the program itself, that was very much triggered by an attitude with which Cassidy this morning already started, to see the science system as one system in our society next to other systems. Or she didn't spoke about systems, she spoke about layers, yeah? And I think that's important if you wanted to reflect. So reflect about the context in which. What is also specifically what we both found intriguing at that time, because I came from evolutionary theories and statistical physics and self-organization and evolutionary economics, and Lut had organized also a conference on evolutionary economics in the 90s. So we both were intrigued by the time dimension. So the phenomena we are studying, they are not falling out of heaven. They are past dependent. They have a history. And if you wanted to understand what you should measure in an ERIC, and if you wanted to understand what the function of an ERIC is, you need to understand how this ERIC, how this intermediary actually came to be. Yeah. So you cannot avoid that. So yes, we need to go deeper, but I'm now bringing water to the pond. I think we heard that a lot of time. And new phenomena unfold through evolution. So I'm still more interested to actually learn why this puzzling kind of, sometimes also seemingly stupid kind of structure formation is going on around us. What is the reason? People are usually not stupid. Yeah? And if people spend a lot of time into something, there is always a reason. But this reason is not always communicated. And what I would wish for quantitative studies is that we communicate also more why we publish these quantitative studies, so that we place ourselves in the more descriptive kind of corner, or the more method pushing corner, or the more theory kind of corner. And what we should also not forget, and I think that was on the slides which I skipped, is that usually, at least as natural scientists, we do measurement for a certain theory. Now that's science historically not always the case. We also sometimes stumble about measured phenomena and then make a theory out of for that afterwards. But there is a relationship between experiment and theory and practice. Yeah. And that is also not always communicated, and it's not so that we don't have enough theory. So sometimes people in scientometrics or quantitative studies think we need another theory. I think we have more theories, but also for all the meta sciences, and we saw that in Cassidy's and in Charles' presentation. This is also big science now, and it sits in so many different corners. And I wish we could find a way to bring this together. Okay, and I think that's the end. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Andrea. Have time for questions.
Do we? Oh,
Yes.
what a relief. What a
10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
Sure. Okay. Yes, please. So, thank you very much. So I'm very happy that you reminded us of the curiosity of the pioneers, which was appeared by modesty. This was to me like a kind of, yeah, it was wonderful to hear that. This is exactly what I have in mind, well, what I'm always stressing. And you mentioned this decoupling from context, from contents. And this is also something, and now I recognize that when I started in the 90s, there had some idea that something might go into the wrong direction. You remember this little scientometrics, big scientometrics, and beyond, the need for standardization, where I thought something might go into the wrong direction. And I had a discussion with Hank Wood in the late 90s when I told him that we have lost our innocence.
Okay.
And he didn't understand me. He asked why. I told him, I think I'm afraid we are going to sell our souls. Not for money, for rewards, for everything. Huh? And now what I see, and that is why I'm so grateful for your presentation. I see so many submissions, so many contributions recently, and please don't misunderstand me. I'm very happy that we have all these tools like computer science-based algorithms, like machine learning, and all these things, and artificial intelligence, which really facilitates our work, and we can perform much more and much better than we did 40 years ago manually. I still remember when we had the SCI index in printed form only, huh? And we had needed a magnifier to read the tiny text. It was like a Bible, huh? And but we had the enthusiasm, huh? And the modesty, of course. What I wanted to say, but nowadays I see more and more contribution in which it is shown that the new algorithms are outperforming those of the competitors in terms of speed, data storage, and precision. But what I don't see, apart from these statistics, is what is the result of that? We use bibliographic data, bibliometric data, all the same data sets, and compare them. And yeah, but I don't see the bibliometric results. I would like to see what comes out of this exercise, apart from higher speed and so on. And this is what you meant probably as well in losing the context, in uncoupling the methods from the content.
You can apply it to everything, but it's also uncoupling from the goal. The goal is to come up with better results in terms of the analysis you would like to conduct. And there was a very good initiative, you have not mentioned that, by Jochen Glaser.
Yeah.
Same data, different results.
Yeah.
And that was also a very interesting project. And unfortunately, there was a challenge, but without any response, I have to say, in which we have shown what might go wrong if we just apply methods without thinking about what we are really measuring once we measure. Huh? And this is, that is the proof of the eating is the pudding, and this is the pudding here, I have to say. And that's the reason why I'm so thankful for your presentation. And this is something we have to re-invite. We have to go back to the roots. Once we have better tools, we do have better tools, without any doubt. But we have to go back to the roots and to check again what we are doing actually. Okay, thank you very much.
That's a big compliment, Wolfgang. That's making my day now, not to say my week. Yeah. So maybe because of the journey I have done myself, I'm interested in building bridges, and I'm always interested in how can you build bridges and when do you fail to build bridges. And I think we're all aware of the kind of the differentiation, evolutionary spoken, of the science system. So I think that the task at hand is really, Cassidy said it, she said it very bluntly, she said we need to go out and read, yeah, and engage solarly also with other kind of communities. Otherwise, the risk is that we get lost. And scientometrics, amazingly, has been able to rejuvenate through the cycle. So altmetrics was embraced. Yeah. Also, I think CWTS sorted out the evaluative kind of branch from the fundamental research kind of method, fundamental applied research kind of branch, how to deal with that properly, ethically. The whole of the social science, philosophical kind of context of evaluation. So there has been really, really great stuff. I think semantic web is about coming to be integrated, yeah. But there are still corners in the computer sciences which have their own kind of, they start from scratch, and this is also nothing to blame people for, but to think of how can we actually solve that, yeah. So I have worked with Richard Smiraya together, and he sits in a corner called knowledge organization. Whenever I tried to science locate him with my own word, he was offended, and he is a dear friend, yeah. But because he wouldn't call it this way, and he has this rigor people have, which are in the middle of a specialty, and they kind of almost embody the sophistication of the knowledge in this specialty. I don't have this rigor. I'm a butterfly. So I can much more losing up, and I'm then also losing up and using terminology. And he says, no, you can't do this. And I say, yeah, but if I tell that in the terms you use to my computer scientists, they lost. They will not turn into knowledge organization people. So we need to find a language. And we know, since Peter Gellison and many other people, that we all need to loosen up to be able to talk to each other. So how to organize that, what Cassidy also said, yeah, how to do this through education, through reaching out to other communities, to organizing workshop like this one. This is a big task. And the science maps, I think, are a beautiful vehicle, yeah. So I was jumping up and down when they kind of popped up in the, when was it the first science map, child map? They were in 2000, 2005, 6, Sidespace Centrals 2006, yeah. Clarence Boyak's 2005, I think, because they enable us to science locate us, not in terms of publications, but just in communication. So I'm using the maps a lot if I talk to students.
Thank you. So mine's more a comment than a question, really, and I guess it'll elicit some response from you. So you, I mean, some of the themes you're dealing with is this this turn to accessing larger and larger sets of data, and it reminded me of something a mentor said to me, David Hall, who was a philosophy of science. What he noted was there's even back in 1990 there is a surplus of data. There is just endless data out there available, and the key is actually to ask the right questions. And he was saying, I mean, you can start by just asking the questions the available data can answer. So that's the sort of low-hanging fruit. Now, of course, we don't want to be constrained just to that, but and I think this theme has come up in some of the talks, just the importance of asking the right questions, or and asking interesting questions, because just because you can count it or study it or whatever, it doesn't mean it's worth doing. So I see that coming out in your thought.
Yes, it should always start from questions. Yeah. But what I would wish that people embrace more is read more about evolutionary theories. Yeah. So I have been very much influenced by a book called The Knowledge Tree by Maturana Varela. Yeah. That's not the only book. There are many books of this kind. Yeah. And understand the information space we are in from an evolutionary point of view. And if you do this, it actually doesn't matter which kind of data you preserve and what kind of data you use. There is always noise in the system. So also from a data archive, I would say the answer is not record everything, because then you're stuck in documentation. That's impossible. You can never digest. Yeah. You are in a mutation catastrophe. You have all variants, but no selection, no time for selection going on. But also the answer is not preserving. Yeah. In the history, things have been preserved by accident, and we work with accidentally survived data. Yeah. And this is also something sometimes people believe, because it could be recorded, that we should record. Yeah? And maybe the old Egyptian also thought if they really hammer it in the stones, and they actually had a bigger chance than we have today. Yeah, but that's also how evolution cures itself. So I do think I would recommend take an evolutionary kind of approach. And for me, that helps me a lot to relativize, because I know complex systems, they self-organize, they will find, we in them will find a solution. Yeah? So it's better to work with the complex systems than against them, also for your own mental health.
Yeah. We have time for a short question. Okay. Then we thank again Andrea. Thank you very much.